Hi, it's Eran here from realestatemarketing.net.au and welcome to the discussion on choosing a domain name for your real estate website. So if you are watching this video, you are either thinking about or is very genuinely and seriously want to get your own website up and running. And before we choose what your website's going to be built with and who you're necessarily going to host it with and what kind of content you put on it, you actually need to come up with a domain name first. So if you've never realize this, every time you see a website that's, for example, abc.com.au or in my case, realestatemarketing.net.au. So that's a domain name. It's kind of like your, I guess, your address or your street address on the internet. And so every website typically will require one. Now, as you can just see from this screenshot here, there's lots of them. So there's the obvious ones you're already familiar with, like the .coms, the .com.aus, the .nets, the .orgs, etc. But then there are country-specific ones, such as, obviously in Australia we would have the .com.au or the .net.au. In the UK they might have a .co.uk, etc. US, although there is a .us, they don't tend to have that as their specific US-centric one. It's usually the .com that's the generic one for them. And then there's a whole pile of new ones that have come out, of which there's a small list here, including things like .academy, .agency, etc. And there are some real estate related ones. So let's dive in and have a look at what kind of things we're going to talk about. So in this video I'm going to talk about, number one, what is a domain name? Number two, why do you need one? Number three, how do you buy one? Number four, where do you buy one? And number five, how much does it cost to actually buy a domain name? So first things first, what is a domain name? And pretty well I've already answered that. So it's essentially, it's your address on the internet. Now, in actual fact, computers on the internet, web servers, websites, they're actually normally recorded in what's called an IP address, which is a series of four numbers. So 102.24.36.181, for example. It's called an IP address. Don't need to know about it, but it's the kind of thing that will confuse the heck out of everyone. So the idea behind the domain name system was created to make it easier to find a website. So when you type in your website address, fredsmithrealestate.com, for example, what it does is it goes out to what's called a name server, and it actually says, okay, well, that's the domain name. What's the actual IP address? So it does a lookup in this big giant database that runs all the way around the world, comes up with the actual IP address of the server, and then it forwards your browser to that server to see a website. But you've got that address at the top. So why do you need one? Look, couple of reasons. Number one, it's a lot easier for people to find a website with a domain name than remembering what the heck your IP number is, because there's four sets of numbers and each of them run from 0 to 255. So the number of combinations of those is in the tens or hundreds of millions, probably even more. So it's much easier to say, my website is fredsmithrealestate.com.au than it is to say 102.244.181.0, for example. People are just not going to remember that. So that's probably the number one. Number two, it's a great branding tool. So I look at my business, realestatemarketing.net.au. It tells anybody who sees that exactly what I do as a business or what service I provide. If you're operating under your typical real estate agency, if we're looking at here in Australia, we've got raywhite.com, ljhooker.com.au, theagency.com.au, etc., etc. So their brand name is also tied up in that domain name. So it's also a useful tool from a branding perspective, because if someone knows your business's name, they can much easier to find it if they can just go to Google and type in, well, I'm looking for an LJ Hooker office. I'll just go to Google and type in ljhooker.com.au, for example. So how do you buy one? So that's actually the easy part. So you buy domain names from companies that sell them. And there's a whole pile of people out there that sell those. You could just go to Google and do a search for domain names. Just about any web hosting company will sell a domain names as an option, and then there's third-party companies that sell them by themselves. So, for example, probably the best known one out there would be GoDaddy. So GoDaddy.com, for example. So you could go there and just buy domain names if you want. There's lots of other options as far as that goes. with setting up your own website. In this training, we're going to show you how to buy a domain name from the company that you're going to host for. And the only reason we're doing it that way is for convenience. Okay. So where do you buy one? Well, online. Okay, it's not like you walk down to a shop, you go in and say, oh, I'd like to buy a domain name, here's my credit card. So you buy it online, and typically it's going to be, if you don't have one, it's probably almost always going to be from the company you buy your hosting or rent your hosting from. So we'll talk a bit more about that. How much does it cost? And you know what, prices range from as little as $1 to hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and then I'll show you a bit of an example afterwards with some of the domain names I own across different areas and how much they're potentially worth. So a domain name has value. I remember when I was the marketing manager for a finance company, we were setting up a new brand in the loan space called Best Loans, and I had to go out and find the owner of bestloans.com.au and negotiate with him to buy that domain name. And I think off the top of my head we paid, I want to say about $5,000 for it back in 2014, 2013. There are domain names that were worth literally $1 million, you know. But typically if you're buying a new one and it's not something that's got a high value attached, you're probably looking between, you know, for a typical .com you might pay $10 a year, maybe $20 a year, depends on who you buy it from. Some of them are more expensive, some of them are less. When you buy it, you're essentially renting it, so you have to renew it. It's like a subscription, and it depends on how long you buy it for. Do you buy it for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? In some cases, you can't do anything beyond one choice. So now we get into the choosing a domain name for your website. So you could go, I can't give you the answer to this question. This is not necessarily an easy topic, but I'm just going to try and give you some ideas to think about, and then you have to find out, number one, is the domain name available? Because if someone else has already bought it, you won't be able to buy it. So I can't go to a domain provider and buy, for example, realestate.com.au. Here in Australia, that's already a well-known brand. If you wanted to buy that domain name, they'd probably charge you $100 million for it. It's got that much brand value. So you could start with something simple like just your name. So if you're a real estate agent, your name is Fred Smith, you could just buy fredsmith.com. Now the examples I'm giving you here, I'm just going to do as .coms, only just to save a little bit of space on the screen. You could buy .com.aus, you could buy .nets, .net.aus, .co.io. There's a heap of options. I'm just going to use the .com as a simple one. So you could start with your name. Now, if you happen to have a common name, it may not be available. We'll talk a little bit about how to deal with that kind of issue afterwards. Another thing could be your name plus real estate related. So for example, if we're talking about our mate Fred Smith, we could have realestatefred.com. So we're using the word real estate or some real estate related term in combination with a name. It could be Real Estate Fred Smith, or it could be fredsmithrealestate.com. It doesn't really matter. You can mix and match them kind of how you feel comfortable. And it's whatever you like the sound of. In my video showing you how to set up your website, we actually ended up buying one for... Sorry, I just had to pause there while I opened a website. So this is a site that I've set up for a client. So Belinda Anderson's a real estate agency in Queensland. And so we bought propertybybelinda.com for her. Okay, so you got lots of choices as far as that kind of stuff goes. It can be imaginative. You could do location related. So for example, if you are a real estate agent in the Perth suburb of Nedlands, you might say, okay, well, I'm going to do a suburb name or a city name and some word maybe related to real estate. That could be nedlandsrealestate.com, or it could be, in this case, Nedlands Living. So it's more of a, I guess, a general term that covers what things are like living in Nedlands, and you could fit real estate as a subtopic in there. So you've got plenty of choices there. You could do location and real estate related, and that's where I kind of jumped the gun there. That's where we'd have nedlandsrealestate.com, for example. So I've got one, I think it's got realestatasubiaco.com, which is like a demo site I've got set up. You know, there's lots of options as far as that goes. There could be a specialty related domain name. So if you were an agent that specialized in a particular kind of business, so in this case, maybe you're an agent that primarily works with people that are retiring and downsizing, for example, you could build a website around the topic of retirement living, and one of the aspects of that could be the real estate business that you do. So it's a great option for you in terms of being a little bit more general and covering a broader topic, which can work in your favor. Not everyone's interested in real estate and just real estate. You could do a postcode example. So the best example I can give you is Scott Lackman's 4510tv.com in Caboolture in Queensland. So that's our website. Caboolture in Queensland is the postcode there is 4510. So he decided some years ago to build a website that was video based, hence the TV. And he wanted about Caboolture, so he just said 4510tv.com. So it's a great idea. Okay, you could certainly do something like that. And then you'll find quite often when you're looking for domain names that aren't always necessarily available, so you have to add on little extra words, for example. So like Scott added on the TV there. I've had a website in the past, talkwebtv.com.au. I've had a website all about suburbs. So, and the example one I've got is allaboutInaloo.com, which is Inaloo, weird name though it is a suburb name. I've had websites with 24/7 at the end of them, which is, it's about a topic, and 24/7 implies that it's available and accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, etc. Or you could have hyphens there. So, for example, if we've got Nedlands Real Estate, we might not be able to buy that as it stands because somebody's already got it. So we could have Nedlands hyphen or dash realestate.com, for example. So there's quite a few options there. You kind of need to explore what you feel comfortable with, and it's worth doing a little bit of a research and think about what kind of message you want to put out there, what kind of brand you want to focus on. So some of the considerations when choosing a domain name are, number one, if you choose one that has a location in the name, whether it's a postcode or a suburb name, will you potentially, as the agent, will you potentially be eventually changing your selling location? So 4510tv.com is great for Scott, but if Scott moves out of the Caboolture area and off to, Melbourne or Sydney, for example, and decides he wants to start selling real estate there, then that domain name and that website is not going to be of much value to him because of that. So you want to think about that, particularly if you're focusing on one individual suburb. You might want to say, am I going to work in this suburb selling real estate for 5 or 10 years or whatever the case may be at the very least? If you aren't, then you might want to think about, should I do that or not? I can't answer these questions for you. All I can do is give you some ideas to think about. Will you be creating a website that's just got real estate related content, or will it have a mix on it? So Scott's 4510tv.com is an excellent example of someone who's done a mix. So it's a community website about Caboolture, living there. So there's lots of stuff about what's going on in Caboolture, the local news. There's reviews of businesses in Caboolture. There's history of Caboolture. There's interviews with people who live in Caboolture. Oh, and there also happens to be some real estate related stuff, which, he runs a real estate agency, Richardson Wrench. So that's also on the website. So my personal advice is normally to go for a mix, because if it's a one-trick pony and you're only talking about real estate, then you do run the risk that people are not going to visit it as often if they're not in the space of looking for real estate, whether it's to buy, sell, or invest. So my personal advice is to go for a mix and think about that when you're choosing a domain name. Is the domain name you want actually available? It'd be great to say, okay, well, I'm going to buy sydneyrealestate.com.au, but I can guarantee you it ain't available. Okay, so you do need to think about that, and that's where I gave you some examples earlier of adapting to domain names that are not available by putting hyphens in there, or 24/7, or TV, or all about, or any of those different number of things that you can do. Top level availability. So the top level domain availability is things like, is it a .com or a .com.au? Is it a .net? Is it a .net.au? Is it whatever? So you may want to buy sydneyrealestate.com, but it may not be available. But you might be able to get sydneyrealestate.net or sydneyrealestate.net.au. I know you can't, but you might be able to. That's one of the reasons that my website, my business site, is realestatemarketing.net.au, because the .com wasn't available. Well, neither was the .com.au, so I didn't have much choice there. I wanted that domain name. with those three words in the domain as they sit. So I chose the option that was available. So that may impact your ability to choose one of those things. And you might say, well, no big deal. You know, the one thing I noticed about just about every real estate agent I've ever met and talked to is you all, when you talk about realestate.com.au, you always don't mention the .au. I don't know if that's because you don't want to encourage people to visit the website because they're not very popular, whether it's laziness or whatever, but it makes me think that buying a .com.au may be a bit of an issue in terms of people remembering it. So you might just say, okay, well, I'm getting, kombucharealestate.com, for example, might be an easier one to remember. So just something to think about. And some final thoughts for you. So number one, domains expire. Do not lose track of the expiry date. Now, typically you will buy a domain for a minimum of 1 year. And .coms, for example, from memory, you can buy up to 10 years at a time. .com.au's, I think you can only buy 2 years at a time. So you buy, that's it, no other choices. So when they're running out, or when the expiry is about to happen, if you neglect to renew the repayment for the next year or next 2 or 5 or 10 years, it can go offline and somebody else can buy it. And that's happened to me. Many years ago, I had a great domain name that I bought that I was going to build a business on, and unfortunately I went through a relationship breakup and a divorce, and the last thing I was thinking about at the time was the internet. And so by the time I got back into the space of thinking about things, my domain name, unbeknownst to me, had expired and somebody else had bought it and I can't get it back. So you do need to think about that. You have to keep a track of that sort of stuff. That means that you might need to maybe put, if it's a yearly long thing, you might need to put a notice in the calendar on your phone. In 11 months, you'll probably start getting emails before then, but you might say, go and pay domain name, or go and make sure that the domain name is updated, etc. And that brings me on to the second one, which is the credit card. So the credit card you have on your account may expire, and that's happened to me before. If the card expires and you don't realize it at the time, then your domain may not go through and you may lose the domain name. I don't think I actually put it in here, but I just thought of a third one, is your email address. So when you sign up, you have to put an email address on the account. And if you don't have if you're not using the same email address, you may not be getting the alerts. Now, that's happened to a client of mine. She was using a different email address when she bought it, and somehow or another the emails from the domain provider were not showing up, and she didn't realize they had expired. And by luck we found out and managed to get back to the company before it had gone, and we were able to save it for her. Actually, no, I tell a lie. We weren't able to save it. We had to buy a new one because somebody else had bought the domain name. So that's another example. And that was due to an email address she wasn't using anymore. But credit cards expiring is a biggie. Make sure that, whatever the expiry date on your credit card is, make sure that you've got a note or an alert somewhere to check beforehand. Oops, sorry, clicked the wrong button there. So what's next? Make sure you look for hidden words in the domain name. Sometimes you've got 2 or 3 words together. You don't realize that there's a word in there you might not necessarily want. And I've seen some pretty rude ones out there that people didn't know about. This actually happened to me with my, in theory, expertise on this subject. This actually happened to me the other day. I've got a website I'm building. It's a kind of a side project / passion project. And the domain name is fightson.net. It's around the military aviation space. Doesn't matter what it means. What I didn't realize, and a friend of mine pointed out, was that if you read it by sort of thinking where the words are, it worked out fightson.net. And someone said, what's this, a father and son fighting? And I went, oh man, I didn't even notice that one. I've seen infinitely worse than that. So make sure you look at the words and that there's not something rude or unpleasant hidden in there that you might be stuck with. Tiny little tip, but just something to maybe avoid you getting into a bit of an embarrassing situation. Don't use copyright names. In the past, I have bought domain names for, when I was in the IT industry, I bought, Microsoft training videos.com, for example, something like that. If it's a copyright name, don't use it, or you're going to get a call from a lawyer and you'll invariably have to hand over the domain name, and you won't get your money back, and they may still take you to court. So be very careful about that as well. I certainly wouldn't be recommending using your agency if you work for a branded agency. I certainly wouldn't be using their name in your domain. just to be safe for you. They might not like it either, even if you work for them. Watch out for spelling mistakes. I've seen lots of people accidentally spell things the wrong way, buy the domain, set the website up, and look at it and go, oh, poop, I've got the spelling wrong. Be careful. Google the spelling. Get somebody you know who, like me, who's a spelling Nazi to check your spelling. Make sure you've got it right. And also the other thing to think of, and this is something a lot of people don't think about, is how easy or hard is it for somebody else to spell your domain name correctly? When you're on the phone and you say, oh, well, Mr. Smith, my domain name, my website is, abcrealestate.com.au, are they going to be able to spell it, or is it going to be a weird and hard one to spell? I had a client many years ago in the fashion space. This was before I got working with real estate. And they had a weird name business. It was hot.com, I think it was, or .com.au. Now, how do you spell that? Is it one and the word hot? Is it two and the word hot? Is it three? Is it four? It was a nightmare. I can't believe they were stupid enough to choose this, but that's what happened. So think about that as well. Is it going to be easy for people to spell? Is it something you will have to always spell out to people because they get it wrong and they don't get to your website? Try and choose words that are really easy to spell. So I look at my site, real estate marketing, easy, just about anyone can spell that. Property by Belinda, very easy, just about anyone can spell that. 4510tv.com, really easy, anyone can do that. Okay, and that's it. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found that useful. Now actually, before we do that, I'm just going to show you quickly. So in finishing, I just want to quickly show you this. So this is some of the domains I own. Now I think this is 20 or 30 of them here. At one stage I owned a couple of hundred domain names for all these different business things I had. So these will give you a bit of an idea of how I've dealt with issues. So for example, this one, accountants-perth.com. Now you can't buy accountantsperth.com. It'd cost a lot of money. How about All About Perth, apartments-Fremantle, apartments Perth 1, what else? This one is a weird one. Go321.info. IT-careers.info. I'm showing you my history here. Laptops Perth, Lawyer-Perth, Lawyers-Perth, etc. The other thing you might find interesting is that this is the estimated value on the open market for some of these. So All About Perth potentially is worth nearly $1,300. I've got what else here? There's, if I'm selling to a lawyer market, there's $300 or $400 worth in those two. There's $960 for that one. This is my actual main business name, More Customers 24/7. That's not my main domain name, but my main business name. So that's worth nearly $1,200. And I've seen there's 1,009 there, 732, etc. So I've seen domain names. I mean, I've personally been involved in purchasing a $5,000 domain name, and I know people that have been involved in tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in that kind of stuff. So there's just a few little extra ideas to help you come up with how you're going to buy a domain name. I talked about the TV, so this was one I had a long time ago, smallbusinessmarketingtv.com, etc. So I hope you found that useful. So now then, go away, have a think about what you want, have a think about how you're going to make it work for you. Make sure that you go through and just keep an eye on these considerations, and that should be it. Good luck in finding a domain name that works for you. All right, that's Eran Malloch from realestatemarketing.net.au signing off here. See you later.